Hello, everyone. I'm Vito, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host Lucas on another episode of the Light Brigade podcast. How you doing, Lucas?
Not too bad. Yes. Good evening. Sun is shining in England, but I think we had an interesting moment, didn't we, where you were complaining about how cold it was. I was glorifying and how warm it was, and it turned out it's colder here than it is there.
It's the same, but roughly the same temperature. Uh, Different expectations for June 1st. We're about 10 degrees under normal temperature and have been. It's been British level weather here in the New York metro area for the past month. It's been in the teens Celsius and raining when it
Well,
should be sunny and shining. So we'll get into the summer weather tomorrow, hopefully. So,
the advantage of that
but
is green grass, so it's something to look forward
yeah,
to.
the grass looks great. The rain is good for the grass. Today we're going to get into a book that has been called the Great American Novel, right? F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. I have this
Different vibes on the cover.
edition.
Yeah.
This little paperback edition I bought at a bookstore one time for maybe $1. £6 99 in Britain and 10.99 in America.
That's from a time when the exchange rate was a little bit more favorable to my country.
And if you see the tag, I bought it for apparently $8 at the time. But
Ah,
the cover has a picture of a flapper who was a new type of liberated woman of the 1920s that
likewise.
this book
Yeah.
talks about.
So, just one thing
Now,
I'd like to raise with you first, because you just mentioned it there. This phrase, great American novel, I've heard
hmm,
it a few times, not just in
yeah,
relation to this book, but I think it's most commonly used in relation to this book, maybe. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I'd love to know where it comes from because it strikes me as from a nation not usually lacking in confidence, Vito. It strikes me as a little insecure. um, there's the search for the great American novel, and I wonder if it comes back, especially in this era, right, when America was coming out as the great world power,
yeah,
the great. Like there was this sense of okay, but where's the culture? All the culture comes from Europe.
yeah. I forget I think a bit dismissively when a French intellectual of the early 19th century said that America was the only country that went from inception to decadence without any intervening civilization.
I like that.
Right, rather dryly looking down his right.
That's not like the
Um,
French.
no, but there was this feeling that America was always this kind of backwater, and only very slowly did America come to cultural relevance. I think Americans have always had a bit of a what would you call it, uh, they always felt an
Shoulder.
inferiority complex, yeah, an
Mm.
inferiority complex when it comes to Europeans, right?
Yeah.
And the great American novel is this kind of ideal that everyone wants to write the great American novel.
Right, right, right.
So there are great American novels, but the great American novel is almost used jokingly in America. Like, what do you want to do? Write the great American novel, like, because it hasn't been written yet. You
Yeah,
know,
because it
uh,
reminds what it reminded me of, and I don't know if this is the right comparison, but maybe it is for where things were in this era. It reminds me of when there's a British film like Notting Hill or Four Weddings and a Funeral, basically anything
right.
with Hugh Grant, and um, they're like everyone in this country's like, it's a British film that's done well at the box office. Do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
literally every other film that year is American, and there's this
Right.
idea of like when are we going to make the great Brit? No one uses this phrase, but you just get the sense of when's going to make the great British film that's going to compete
Well,
in Hollywood.
I mean, absolutely, and that's the thing. There's the difference. I mean, even George Orwell. George Orwell was was pretty dismissive of the United States. He just didn't talk about America that much.
Mm.
Orwell, yeah, and Dickens as well. But Orwell never even visited the United States. I don't think he just didn't. He wasn't interested in it.
Right.
But he did say in one of his writings that Americans did cinema the best of anyone in the world. He said the
Ooh.
production values are just bar none the greatest.
Yeah.
So we've always done visual arts very well, and there's various reasons for that. Most of the people who did that were actually German Jews who came here.
Mm.
They were
Yeah,
very,
because
they were the people who ran Hollywood.
the silent film industry was originally centered in Berlin. I mean, the German film
Yeah,
industry was incredible. Obviously, German Jews, and probably
yeah,
common sense they weren't welcome in Berlin any longer at that time.
yeah, right. And certainly but the novel as an artistic form, I believe, comes out of come is really kind of a British, at least in the English language, it's a British phenomenon. So,
Mm.
if you look up Great American Novel just on
Mm.
Wikipedia, is it just says it's the term for a canonical novel that generally embodies and examines the essence and character of the United States. And the term was actually coined in 1868 by a writer named John William DeForest in an essay. DeForest noted that the great American novel had most likely not yet been written.
Mm.
But it also says that practically, the term refers to a small number of books that have historically been the nexus of this discussion, including Moby Dick, 1851
Mm.
by Herman Melville, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn,
Yes,
1884,
I've heard it in, yeah.
Mark Twain, The Great Gatsby, 1925, as we're discussing today,
Mm.
and Gone with the Wind, 1936. So there's certainly, it says exactly what novels warrant the title is without consensus, and there's just been contended as the idea has evolved and continued into the modern age with fluctuations in popular and critical regard. William Carlos Williams, who actually grew up in the next town from me,
Oh,
and his house is still there in Rutherford, New Jersey. So his house is still preserved. He was a doctor in town for many years, and he was also a famous poet. They've all written novels about the great American novel. Williams, Clyde Davis, and Philip Roth, titled as such, with Roth's in the 70s, which was a time of prosperity for the concept. So this idea is, I think it's kind of an ideal. You know, it's like it's always. I don't think anyone will ever agree that the great American novel has been written. And I think there's
mm.
a reason for that because of the nature of American society. I think American society changes so radically. It's very easy to write novels about American uh, communities, but it's very hard to call it the great American novel. Like you could say, like for example, The Godfather is one of the great American novels. Certainly, what's one
Right.
of the greatest film trilogies ever made. Number one and two are obviously, I think, some of the best movies ever made. But
Mhm.
when that was written, that's about Italian Americans. That's
Yeah, it does
in New
encapsulate the whole
York, but
experience.
it's not the
Yeah,
American experience, right?
right,
It's
right.
just it's too big of a country.
So
It's
there's
too
kind of
vast.
two
And you,
meanings. There's to enter the canon of English literature
yeah,
alongside Milton and Dickens and whatnot, and
yeah,
then to encapsulate the American experience, which
yes.
is
And
somewhat more
describe
elusive.
American characters.
Right.
There's specifically American characters these are New World people who have grown up with who were born into a world without explicit class systems,
Hmm.
right? I think that's a big thing.
Although,
This idea where, and in the 19th century especially,
mm,
America was still a free country. America is not a free country today in the same way as it was
whoa,
when there was still land to be
hey,
had. You know, when
that-
you could if you didn't like living in the Northeast or you didn't like to live in the East, you could go to the West and stake a claim for land. That was real freedom.
mm,
There was real freedom to be had. There was a high risk reward ratio, and that as the continent got settled by the early 20th century, I think that type of freedom came to an end practically.
I think that's not to get too sidetracked by that, but I think that extends even beyond to those people on the frontier and beyond even America, because a lot of the English liberty thinkers, John Locke, people like that you guys ended up adopting even more than us, is based on this idea. Like John Locke's social contract is based on this idea that
Yeah.
we all agree we live here, and we have these duties and these obligations, and a lot of that hinges on the fact that if you don't like that, you can leave. Whereas now we exist in a world where, I mean, I don't know, if you want to live outside of a governmental system, you don't really have a choice. I mean, what are you going to do? Go to the
No.
Amazon? This is it. Whereas
Yeah.
obviously back then, even as an Englishman, you could say, "We don't like it here. You don't want to fulfill these obligations. You want to serve in the army or whatever." You can always go to America. You can go to the colonies. You can go and start from scratch in the wilderness.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that when you talk about American writers, what separates American writers from, I think, from those in the old world in Europe is that there's always in the back there's this feeling of wonder and awe at the thought of the vastness of the continent, you know? That you could always move west and there's an unlimited sky and there's unlimited possibilities. There's wealth out there, there's danger, there's adventure. I mean, I know even the beat poets, you know, you go to Jack Kerouac, his writing, he goes back and forth across the United States on these road trips several times. And he's like riding in train cars with hobos. And there's this sense of this wonder and this possibility and the vastness of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
interior of the continent, you know? And that's something that doesn't, I think, exist in the tone of that doesn't exist. You have this in European writing.
Everything's much more constrained
Yes.
in England. So I don't know if you want to do the plot summary first, but I think that's. I thought this was quite English in a lot of ways, but
Did you? Really?
well, I think one of the classic what's the word tropes is that Brits see class, Americans see race, and this was a book quite profoundly about class to me.
Yes.
And I don't know if I'm curious what you think if that's just me coming at it as a Brit. Like when you said that I should pick the next book and I should pick the most British novel I could think of, and I
Yeah.
my mind goes to country houses and servants like Downton Abbey kind of Jane Austen type world.
Yeah.
This was like that, right? You've got these rich people living their detached lives going about their petty dramas that they suck other people in with absolutely no concern for what damage they do. There's a
Right.
great line in there. Isn't there? These are careless people. I think it's the phrase Scott Fitzgerald. These are careless people. They can afford to be the Buchanans.
Yeah.
Suck people in, spit them out. And there's a
It
sense
certainly is
that
about,
for all
well, I
his
would say,
accomplishment and financial success, can never enter the old money
yes.
rarefied class because there's nothing
Right.
more the big thing here you still get it there's nothing more garish there's nothing more gauche than a Premier League footballer with the big gold watch, whereas the
Yeah.
true lord of the manor wears a second-hand watch and doesn't care about that stuff because
Sure.
he's got real class.
Yeah. I think it's about the American, it's about a very American thing, the nouveau riche, the
Mm,
parvenu, right, who enters into this, who wants to climb that ladder and is they can smell that he's not old money. He's
not
not
quite right.
raised that way.
Mm,
So Fitzgerald originally called this book. The working title was Trimalchio and West Egg,
mm,
and that refers to this book called the Satyricon by a Roman author named Petronius. Right now,
okay.
Petronius was a kind of a, for lack of a better word, an F. Scott Fitzgerald character. He was a kind of Roman society guy and he describes the foibles of the rich or the nouveau riche. In this case, Trimalchio. There's a section of the Satyricon. What survives of it is a section called Trimalchio's Dinner, or At Dinner with Trimalchio. Trimalchio is a freedman, a freed slave, who has become extraordinarily wealthy, like just unimaginably wealthy in a way only the Romans could really do it. And
So
he
I'm
describes
imagining
the
he's on a chaise lounge and someone's feeding him grapes all day.
That's exactly it. Slaves are coming in, feeding him grapes, and they're pheasants. And the way the dishes are served, like they open it up, and there's a pheasant, and then like I don't know, something else a live bird pops out of the pheasant, or they wheel in a cake, and a nude slave jumps out and starts dancing, and this type of stuff, right? And you get that idea when you hear the descriptions of the lavish parties that are taking
Right.
place on Gatsby's estate. But to go back to the start, right? So we get the story of a guy named Nick Carraway, right? He moves to a town called West Egg. He comes from the Midwest, right? And he has some relatives who live there. His it's his cousin, I believe, right? Who's the woman who's at the
Daisy
heart of
Buchanan.
this story.
Hmm.
Yes, Daisy Buchanan, right? Nick is working in the stock market, so you have the setting the Roaring Twenties. It's like the early 20s. The Great War is over, World War One. America, who wanted to stay out of it, now had helped Europe, helped to pacify Europe and save it from the Germans the first time.
All right. Right.
These guys come back, and the Spanish flu epidemic had swept through. A lot of people had died, and people decided we better have a good time. Uh, and things went crazy. This was the Roaring Twenties. There was drinking, and women had new freedoms. Automobiles really became a thing, allowing people a lot more mobility. And people were getting very rich in the stock market. So he comes to New York to work in the stock market, and he gets a house. He rents a house in this town called West Egg, which is a fictional town in Long Island. And the real town that he's talking about, let me see what it is. It's on the northern shore of Long Island.
Is it real
Um,
or is it a
no, West
fictional
Egg.
place?
West Egg. No, West Egg is fictional.
But Long
Uh,
Island obviously is real.
yes, Long
Actually,
Island
the
is
sound
real.
is
So
Island.
yeah, it's on the Long Island Sound. So the Long Island Sound separates New York from to the north. It's Connecticut, and on the other side of the Sound, you have some of the wealthiest places. If you ever get a chance to come to the United States and you want to go to almost the richest, Connecticut, Darien, Connecticut, Westport, Newport. I went to Newport. You can go on the mansion tour. All of the American industrialists of the 19th century had these incredibly garish palaces built there, which are now you can take tours of them.
Weird.
But so I think he's talking about what a town called Great Neck, which is a
Ooh.
village on Long Island. And Great Neck is a place where the new money resided.
Right, right.
So he just renamed it West Egg, and he describes Great Neck pretty much perfectly.
East Egg
So
is the more
is the
got the
other
money, better,
right?
better place really than East Egg.
Yeah. So if you
West
look
Egg's
on a map, which I'm doing right now, you can't see, but I'm looking up here. So you got where is it? He's got West. Hold on a second. Great Neck is right here, and then you've got on the other side you've got Port Washington, and Port Washington was where in North Hempstead, New York, is where all the old money was.
right.
So I think you get that idea that you have this sort of sense of Trimalchio, the freed slave who, even though he's become incredibly wealthy, is still not considered the social equal of the
Yeah.
old money.
Yep.
And that really, I think that's why they call this a great American novel, not because of, as we'll see, I think how good it is. I think it's just that it describes Americans very well.
Mm.
Is that Americans are sort of looked at and even kind of look at themselves like almost like the barbarians, right? So like German barbarians were not poor, they just weren't Romans. They
Yeah,
weren't
yeah.
they couldn't speak Latin,
Mm.
and they all wanted to speak
And
Latin.
they
And
wanted the
even when they
togas.
did, and
Yeah.
when they became Romanized, the old Romans still looked down on them because they're not really Romans,
Mm.
they're just aping the ways of the Romans.
But
So
isn't
F.
this?
Scott
But isn't
Fitzgerald,
is F. Scott Fitzgerald not? Because that's not something you guys say about yourselves, is it? You say we don't have a calcified class system. Anyone can make it
yeah,
here. It's a melting pot. Blah blah blah. And
yeah, but
yet here we
there's
are.
that sense. Yeah, but
Yeah.
look at us. Look at how we most people slobber after British royalty. Oh, what's happening with the Queen and the King and Prince this and that. Americans we want that, and we said that about ourselves, but then look at like, for example, Winston Churchill's mother,
Mm.
Jenny Jerome. She was a dollar princess. Americans, when they got rich enough, wanted to buy their way into the British aristocracy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because what's the good of just being rich? You need the titles too, right?
But it's interesting, isn't it? It's like you would have thought the opposite would be true because in America it's all about, you would have thought someone who's just rich because their parents were rich and their parents before them, in a society that really venerates, self actualization and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, those
Right.
people would actually feel inferior to someone like Jay Gatsby who's done it himself. You know,
Yeah, but
he's
the thing is,
self-made.
but okay, but we'll get to that part of the story because he's
Yeah,
not really self-made.
yeah,
He
yeah, yeah.
hasn't done it the right. Well, he hasn't done it the right way. Is what,
Sure. Okay.
he hasn't made money because he's a business genius. We'll put it that way, right?
Fair enough. Okay,
Um, so
so Nick Carraway moves to West Egg.
he moves to West Egg and he starts hanging around with his cousin Daisy and her husband, who's a philanderer, right?
Not a nice
He's a
man.
bad egg. He's not a nice man.
Yeah.
He's an entitled guy. You could tell he's part of the old money. And he's openly carrying on an affair with the wife of this garage mechanic, auto mechanic, who lives in a part of a part of the Long Island that's covered with ashes. He goes out of his way to say it's covered with ashes. Every time you go there, there's black ashes everywhere. I guess there was
Actually, a
a
garbage dump, right?
yeah, essentially. And the woman who's married to this guy, now you get something funny because this is still 1920s, right? So you think to yourself, why doesn't she just get divorced from her husband, But she doesn't. She lives with this man that she hates. She believes she's better than him, and she carries on a secret life instead,
Hmm.
right? And it's not really that much of a secret. It's pretty much known to everyone, including Daisy, that her husband is carrying on this affair with this woman.
Hmm.
And they go into New York and they have parties and they drink.
A
They're always
lot.
drinking. That's a big
This is
thing. They're constant.
pre-prohibition, right?
1920s prohibition. Yes, I think it's pre-prohibition. Prohibition would have been 1932. I think it
Okay.
started.
So it's
Wait a
still,
minute. When did prohibition start? Prohibition. It could have been prohibition. No, no, it was. It was prohibition. 1920 to 1933.
well, they don't seem to have problems procuring alcohol.
No, they never did. I mean, some people, some governors of states just refused to enforce the law. They just said we're
Uh,
not going to do that.
okay,
And
interesting.
the federal government couldn't really do much. They said they would send, but they had limited resources, so it was also the Roaring Twenties because of prohibition. It greatly empowered organized crime. I mean, these guys were that's where Al Capone came from. He became extraordinarily wealthy off of bootlegging, and actually the British helped us in this. There was a guy they used to bring they used to bring gin into the Bahamas, and then they'd have rum runners, rum and gin, and then they'd get this one American guy who they trusted, and he would bring it. He would just sail from the Bahamas into Florida and deliver the alcohol.
It's
And the
also, if
Brits were like,
I'm
no,
not mistaken, pretty much the birth of the Scotch whiskey industry.
yeah, Cutty Sark
He
was
said,
invented
yeah.
for the U.S. market, as a matter
Mhm.
of fact.
Yep.
So anyway, there's a lot of it's the way this book is written and structured. It's like the plot. There's the plot. There are chapters that kind of progress the plot, and there are intervening chapters that just set the tone. They describe these parties that people are having, the characters that you meet at these parties, and this idea is that nobody really knows who this guy Gatsby is, and people spread wild rumors about who he is and what he may do for a living. But no one seems to know him. They just show up at his house, they get plastered, and they leave.
Yep.
And no one seems to know the guy or why he's there or what he
Why
does for
he's
a
throwing
living.
these insanely lavish parties for
Yeah, he
everyone.
does it like every weekend.
Hmm.
Finally, this guy Nick meets him and doesn't know that it's him.
He gets
And
invited. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
and as we find out, uh, Nick has been singled out by Gatsby for a special reason because Gatsby knows his cousin Daisy, right? And Daisy, apparently, you find later that him and Daisy had been courting many years before in Ohio. They come from the Midwest. Gatsby comes from the Midwest. Gatsby, you find out later, was really named Gatsmer. He was a guy from whose parents were a bunch of nobodies from Wisconsin. And
Game.
Daisy was always
Okay.
from old money. She was an old money person, and the parents they wouldn't allow her to marry Gatsmer because he didn't have anything. So he goes on to this. He goes into the world into the war, and he comes back out of the war, and he gets tied up with these. Essentially, it looks like a bunch of mobsters. He's close with this Jewish mobster, and got into bootlegging, and that's
I
how he
didn't
got.
catch that that Jewish guy was a mobster.
Yeah, he
But
was a
obviously he
mobster.
wants
Yes.
connections, he says, apparently, is
Connections, yeah, with that special, that New York Jewish, the connections.
there? Nice.
It, at any rate, yeah. So he's tied up with mobsters, and he got all his money from bootlegging. So I mean, I think that kind of shows you Fitzgerald's attitude, where, and I would think Fitzgerald isn't trying to say, like, in other words, he's trying to say there's the old money, and I think the old money made their money probably the same way, but they did it in a different way, a different underhanded way, but like, 50 years before.
Uh-huh.
So now it's cleaned. It's laundered. It's come out clean the other side, and they're the aristocracy now. And now
Well,
there are the
especially
new
because
ones.
Daisy, the Fays of Kentucky, I think, is she from?
Yes, that's right. That's
They
right.
were presumably slaveholders.
Yes. Yes, that I think that's the intimation there, and I think there's echoes back to what would have been called the Gilded Age in America, and Mark Twain coined that term because the gilding is the gold outside and it's cheap metal on the
Right,
inside,
right.
right? And that's kind of the idea of what you get. This old money represents the Gilded Age in America, which I think came to an end after the 1920s and the collapse of the stock market. So there's all this pretension, there's this ostentatious show of wealth, and people were desperate to break into it. So you see, it comes out that Gatsby has set up this identity for himself, and he bought this house because it's actually right across this little body of water from where Daisy Buchanan lives.
The
And
green light.
there's the green light. So what did you think the green light represented?
This, I see everything I've read about is like the green light, the green light. I didn't put as much significance in the green light when I read it. I just
No,
saw it as he like knows that's her house. So, but they do talk about it.
I
It
think
does
it
talk
should be
about it.
taken literally. I mean, it
Um,
just take it literally. What does green represent?
Go
Dough, money. Yeah, it's money.
money. Well,
I think that's what it means.
I really
Because Fitzgerald actually was famous for saying him and Hemingway used to know each other,
mm,
and him and Hemingway had these different. Fitzgerald was this wannabe. He wanted to be
yeah,
seen as rich and
irritating.
sophisticated, and Hemingway didn't really give a damn about that, right? So Fitzgerald once famously said, "The rich are different than you and me," and Hemingway said, "Yeah, they've got more money."
Yeah.
So but in a way, I think that's kind of true. It's this idea that like money gets you,
Mm,
I don't know what you'd call it, right? It gets you breeding of some kind, right? You don't
mm.
have to do the same things that
Well,
the
yeah, I mean,
working
like
slob has to do.
Gatsby, even for all his money, he's in these parties. He's constantly being called away to take calls from Chicago and
Yeah,
from
well,
wherever else.
right, his friends, yeah, who he
Whereas
has to take
Tom
care of these problems.
Buchanan does nothing. He does nothing with his time except cheat on
Yes,
his wife and read
drink
racist books and drink.
and rant about how the white man is under siege, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I thought that was actually kind of comical that he
Mm,
gets so worked up about it when
yeah,
he's drunk, and everyone just sort of like looks at him and goes,
yeah,
"Well, anyway."
yeah, 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 exactly.
So anyway, uh, basically Gatsby wants Nick to set up a meeting between him and Daisy, and he sets up this meeting, and they kind of rekindle their affair. And Daisy is very conflicted about this because Gatsby wants her to, repudiate her husband, tell him that she never loved him, and come away with Gatsby. And she doesn't want to do that because she's torn over the whole
Mhm.
situation. So it comes to a head. They have a confrontation between Gatsby and what's his name? What's Buchanan's name?
Um,
Tom Buchanan, and Tom basically wins. She admits that she really she's going to stay with Tom. She's not going to leave with Gatsby. And Gatsby kind of has to admit defeat, and he kind of shuts down the whole circus, and his house goes dark. He stops throwing these parties, and then things kind of go where what happens? His Tom's the woman that Tom is having an affair with gets hit by a car that was driven by Daisy after this blowout. She's all broken up, and she's driving the car recklessly down the road.
but with
And at
Gatsby in
that
it.
moment, with Gatsby in it, but he's in the passenger seat.
And this happens,
Uh,
so the big confrontation happens in New York City, right? It's
right.
impossibly hot, and they're all drinking.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, one thing I didn't quite understand is once Gatsby appears to have lost, the resolution is that he and Daisy drive back in his car,
Yeah.
and Tom and Nick and Jordan go back in the other car.
Right. Jordan. We didn't bring up Jordan. Jordan is like a peripheral character who's a friend of
Daisy.
Daisy and kind of a minor love interest of Nick's.
Yeah, and a
She's kind
golfer.
of just kind of aloof, doesn't really
Yeah, yeah,
care much about anything.
yeah,
Keeps an ironic distance
yeah.
between her and
But
everything.
Myrtle's her name, isn't it? She runs out to Gatsby's car. Is it Gatsby's car? Yeah. No.
Yeah. So
Is it the
Gatsby.
Gatsby? Is it the Daisy's driving Tom's car? I lost it.
No, I think it's Gatsby's car, and I think Tom just shows that, like, to Tom, it's not about Daisy. He couldn't give a toss about Daisy. Essentially, is that he wants to show that he won. He won against Gatsby, so he's like, yeah, sure, drive back with Daisy. What do I
Yeah,
care?
yeah,
You
yeah.
don't. I'll have my mistress and my wife. You can't have what's mine. So she drives back, but she's driving the car, and Myrtle runs out after having her own blowout with her
Mm.
husband, and Daisy clips her with the fender of the car and just drives away, and it basically cuts her in half. And she's just got a big, gash in her chest, and she's dead. They run out, and the cuckolded husband, has suspected that his wife is running around behind his back. And he goes about finding out whose car it
Well, because
was.
obviously Tom and the rest of the other car come behind it,
They
and
see what
Tom basically
happened.
says to Wilson, well, Gatsby was kind of says that Gatsby was having sex with your wife, eventually, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
And he says Gatsby was having sex with your wife instead of me. He
yes.
tells him that, and he goes to find out who the car was, and he finds out where Gatsby lives. And Tom goes over to Gatsby's house and shoots him to death,
Mm,
and then kills himself.
mm.
And that's kind of, and essentially that's the end of the action in the book,
Yes,
right? And then
although I
there's
do
a,
think it was interesting. So Nick then arranges Gatsby's funeral, doesn't he? And
and yeah, no one
can't
comes.
rustle up like one mourner.
Nobody
I
wanted to
guess
be
his
involved.
dad, who's quite a sad figure.
And his father comes. Gatsby's
Yeah,
father comes, and his father's impressed. His father's this
yeah.
old
And
this
it's
old
achieved.
man, and he's impressed by what his son's achieved. He said he ran away from home, and we never saw him, and we were sad about it. But when we see what he's been able to do, it's just pretty amazing. So to the old man from the Midwest, it's amazing. But Nick, after this, he decides he's going to return to Ohio
Yeah.
because New York is not to his liking, and he says kind of a goodbye to Jordan and leaves, right? And then at the end, he says there's some kind of there's a very famous line at the end, right?
Beautiful.
So basically, he says at the end, the last couple of paragraphs, I think it bears reading, right?
Yeah,
It
definitely.
says, "And as I sat there brooding on the old unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the city. You see, that's what I mean. The vast obscurity of the United. This is in the American psyche. This vast obscurity of what's behind the city, right?
Mm.
In that vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgiastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. That's one of the famous closing lines of any
Yeah.
book. And I thought about it. What does he mean by that? And that's he's trying to make, I believe, a statement about the American character. I think Gatsby is supposed to be a kind of a personification of the Americans' incessant striving for improvement and striving for status, striving for wealth. We come out of this nowhere and we try to move towards this thing, but we're constantly pulled back by what we are, by what's behind us.
Which
So in a certain sense, there's not the progress that we're based on. It can't happen. It can't be, right?
and
Because
do
he believes, yeah,
well. I was just that ceaselessly to the past thing. There's two things about that. One is obviously Daisy is a woman from his past that he went back to for reasons.
yeah.
Like he's obsessed with her, and you kind of wonder there are other girls and she's not that great. So why did you become obsessed with her? And then the second one, I think that maybe the more American reading of it is he went back east, and you're not meant to do that. The future is west. That's America, right? The vast
I think,
obscurity
yeah,
beyond the
yeah,
city perched on the east. That's where you go. And all of these characters, they went back east to the calcified class structure. The future is west. That's America,
yeah.
right?
I could see that. Yeah, I think psychologically he's saying something different. I think
Okay.
he's saying that there's this belief, right? But Gatsby believed in the green light, right? He believed that money could change him
Mm,
on some almost atomic level,
mm,
right? Because that's what I think Fitzgerald believed, that money made you a different level of human being. So I think on the cellular level, he wanted that money to change him, from what he used to be.
right.
And he believes in that orgiastic future that recedes year by year behind us, right? That we fail to reach it because it's not something that can be reached, right? It's like this state of mind. It's a total transformation of the human, and we can't reach it. It eludes us continuously. So we're constantly chasing and we're constantly swimming against the current and being borne back into the past, right? But I think what he means is that it's like it's not really the past. It's static in a certain sense. We're not really progressing. We have this idea of ourselves progressing, and it doesn't do. It's hollow. It's not changing us. We're still the same as we were.
So
We're
is it
still we're still the people that came from the darkness outside the city,
so is it the
right?
idea that he thought if I what I'm lacking, what makes me not a suitable partner for Daisy is that she's rich and I'm not. Her family's
Yes.
rich, my family's not rich. If I
Hmm.
become rich, then she will fall into my lap and everything will be right.
Right.
But he became as rich as possible, but he still wasn't old money, and so
Yeah.
doesn't
And
matter.
he sold, in a certain sense, he sold his soul in order to, there was this trade-off. He became, he was a criminal. So
Sure.
I mean, there's that. Uh, and once it became clear after Tom, I believe, looked into his background, and when they were arguing, he said, "This guy's a criminal. He's a mobster. He's tied up with mobsters. His money comes from illegal activity.
Mm.
He's not. Who is he? He's just as he's like he's one of these Jewish hucksters, in the city that are selling bootleg liquor and whatever else he's tied up in. So it's not the right way. I mean, I think in a certain sense, the old money that carries that European idea that the way to get rich is to inherit it. You can't earn it. That's not the way, right?
Yeah, right.
Now, but that's the thing. In America, I think we had mercantilism, and I think it was considered. For us, it was okay. Like if you became filthy rich through business
Mm.
acumen, then that was honorable. If you made your money in the major industries, the railroads, steel, building the infrastructure of the country,
Like a
we
Carnegie
say, okay,
type
it's
or a
right, exactly.
yeah,
And Carnegie was Scottish. Carnegie
right,
was Scottish.
of course.
we have a lake at Princeton University that was donated by him, and it's called Lake Carnegie. And the president of the university at the time, they needed money, and he went back to him and he said, we need money. And he said, well, I already built you a lake. It's an artificial lake. He goes, I built you a lake. He's like, yeah, but we needed bread and you gave us ice cream.
Ah,
Something of that nature, right? But these people came here, but they saw, a European like Carnegie saw that this was the land of opportunity for him. But that doesn't change. Like, you're never told how the Buchanans and you're never really told how they made their money. It's just
no.
that they've had money for generations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you do, you don't want to mix with baser materials in a certain
Yeah.
sense, right?
That's true. A couple of things that I thought was funny because it struck me as very modern was when his dad, Henry Gatz, said with a Z.
Gatsmer, I think.
I think it's just Gatz with a Z.
Oh, is it?
So it's like
Mhm.
because Gatsby, very Anglicization, isn't it? Very waspy. Because all
Exactly.
BY things anyone would BY are Viking actually,
Right.
but that's a bit niche. He says he's got like he had these lists of like self improvement lists.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Like
Right. Right.
what was it like? Save $5 and he's crossed out $3 and like was it like do push ups, do not no more smoking, and
Yeah.
bathe every other day, and it just made me think like if Gatsby was around today, he'd be like a Joe Rogan bro, wouldn't he? He'd be like protein shakes and gains in the gym, to get
That's
Daisy.
funny.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, I just think. What am I saying here? Like, it's like Gats, right? He's one of these people. Like, I think at the end of the book, doesn't Nick decide that all the people involved, the commonality between all of them is that they all originated in the Midwest, and they're not suitable to life in the in
In
the
New
in the
York.
Northeast,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and that it's a different type of thing, and I think that's what it is. I think there's it's unspoken, but I think there is this idea that New York and the surrounding areas of the Northeast are essentially extensions of the old world,
Mm,
right? The rules of the old world still apply there.
yeah.
And it's when you go to the Midwest where a person can actually make themselves into something without the calcified class structure we tell ourselves isn't there, but it is there,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think it is there anyway. I always make the joke like Barack Obama got elected as president of the United States. The first black man to be elected president of the United States, but yet he's related to like five different former presidents and some of the
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
prestigious families in the country. So it just
Yeah.
goes to show you you can get elected to be the president if you're a black man as long as you're related
As long as you've
to the
got
oldest and wealthiest
connection.
families in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you have connections,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
related to George Bush. He's re- he's related to some
Is
of
that
the
true? I didn't
the
know that.
oldest. Yes, they're all related.
Open
So it just
chain
goes to show
Indian.
you yeah, it's the land of opportunity as long as you're the descendant of
It's interesting though. You don't talk about that stuff, but yeah, it's true. I mean, certainly some English eyebrows were raised when it looked like you guys were going to go, Bush Clinton, Bush Clinton. It's like you just exchanging royal families at this point,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
dueling royal dynasties.
But how I see that's what it is. I mean, we often say, uh, if you look at the debates people have about the importance of the centrality of religion in life. For example, they'll often say, the atheist side will say religion is harmful, and then the religious people say, well, the atheist regimes of the 20th century were just bloodthirsty. You look at the Soviet Union, and then they'll counter, yeah, but those regimes were kind of religious,
Yeah,
weren't they?
yeah, yeah.
You know? And that's the same thing in America. Like we're kind of yeah we're classless, but we do kind of have a class system, don't we? Right?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think any human society has ever not had a class system.
No, I think that's fair. So do you think? I mean, F. Scott Fitzgerald, is he like pro America and the American dream, or is he mocking it?
I think he's pointing out. I think he's pointing out that there is a hollowness and a vulgarity in the center of it. And people have, I think that's in the tradition of Mark Twain, where it's you point out that what America is built on is always going to be something that we could tell ourselves that we're better. We could tell ourselves that that we're all getting to the top based on talent, and this is the meritocratic society. But in the middle, there's always something rotten in the middle of it.
Mm,
And Mark Twain pointed that out, and H.L. Mencken pointed that out, and I think that's really what the American
yeah.
tradition
Mm,
is pointing out that we're blowing smoke up our asses, and we tell ourselves that anybody can go to the top.
mm,
Not anybody can go to the
yeah.
top. They're not going to let you go to the top.
Mm,
They're going to let you get to a certain point, but they're never going to accept you.
mm.
And I think we see that. I mean, look at politics. You got Barack Obama, relative of all the presidents, and then you have, Donald Trump. Donald Trump's father, very rich, but he's not related to presidents. They
It's a good
didn't
point.
want him,
We
you
have
know.
that with Trump, and you have that with Trump. We have it with Nigel Farage, where people will say, they'll mock the idea that these are anti-establishment figures because they'll say, Trump was born a millionaire. They'll say Nigel Farage worked in the city of London, right, as like a stockbroker or whatever.
Right,
But I
right.
think that's kind of to deliberately misunderstand the point. The point is they are not of the establishment. You can be as rich as you like, but you are not of
Yes.
that group. Keir Starmer was, as he's fond of saying, the son of a toolmaker, but he also became a human rights lawyer, went to the right
Right.
universities. Like he's very much part of that milieu. So yeah, I think that's why I say it struck me as very English because it's very much class is not money. There's a
Yes.
connection to the two, but they are not
Yes.
the same.
Well, right. I mean, that's like I said, go back to Trimalchio, right? You can become excessively vulgarly wealthy as a former slave, and people come to your parties, but they're not going to consider you a patrician, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not.
So,
So money is not the only thing. So
and another
I,
way
I
in
think
which,
that's what he's
sorry, you
right.
go.
No, 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 go ahead.
Well, I can say another way in which he's quite um, naive is that I feel like Gatsby's offered the opportunity to claim some establishment credit by saying he's an Oxford man. Because people
Right,
say, "Oh, I heard he was an Oxford man," which is even better than a Harvard man, surely, because it's back in the old world. And
right, right.
he's like, "Oh no, I just went there for a term after there was this weird like GI
Yeah, right.
program, and so I went to Oxford for like a term." But anyone a bit more conscious of their status would be like, "Oh yes, I'm a very proud Oxford man. I loved my afternoons on the stairwell, and I loved reading in the Bodleian Library, and all these guys."
Oh, of course, of course. And now, keep in mind, like Nick Carraway, right? He went to Yale. Yale is one of the top colleges in the
Healthy
United
talent.
States,
Mm,
one of the Ivy Leagues. So I believe it goes like in the rankings, it's generally Harvard and Yale are like the two best, and then like Princeton is
Princeton.
like they're like tied for number one. Princeton is like number two or three, and then it kind of goes on from there. So Fitzgerald himself went to Princeton.
Ah,
So he was one of these people, right? He's one of these people who I believe he came from somewhere else and tried to make it big in the city.
mm,
Fitzgerald was a just an absolutely hopeless alcoholic. He ended up
really?
drinking himself to death at a young age. His wife Zelda, him and Zelda were big society people in the Roaring Twenties, and I believe she died in a sanitarium as well. But he ended up selling out and writing for Hollywood,
Yeah, and
which
not
which you'd
very
see that from
successfully,
reading
right?
this. Right, as you can see in this book, you could read this and go, this is like it reads like a movie script almost. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
what I find myself thinking about this is like the writing is very good. He has a very good ability. It's very his ability to write scenes and tableaus is absolutely unmatched. I think it's great when he describes these parties. Those are my favorite parts of the book. I go, wow,
Yeah.
his ability to describe scenes is absolutely fantastic. He'd be a great screenwriter. You
That's
think
really
to yourself, and
enough.
then when he goes and he tries to build character and he writes dialogue, I think maybe it's a little lacking there. They don't
Yeah.
seem. There's almost something wooden about the way they speak.
Do you want
It's
to
a,
know? Do
it's
you want to know something that
it's
makes me?
affected.
Yeah, I get that. Do you want to know something that makes me a bit sick in my mouth?
So,
He was 28 when he wrote it.
really?
28. So you mentioned he
Yeah.
died. He died at 44.
Yeah.
He'd already written two books before, and this is so apparently this was his attempt to be taken seriously because he was seen as he writes books about flappers, basically,
Right, right, right,
and
right, right.
he produced this because he was trying to say, no, I've got bigger things to say, and everyone just said, oh yeah, another book about flappers.
It's come to be seen in, posthumously for him at least as one of the great American novels.
Not when he was alive, though.
No, not when he was
No.
alive. Now here's the thing. In America, this book is usually something you read when you're in high school, right? This is like a canonical high school book, right? It's not usually read by adults. Everyone goes, "Oh yeah, I had to read this book in high school," right?
So everyone hates it.
I I didn't. I've
Ah,
never read this book before, right?
before
Because when
this?
I was in high school, no, I've never read this
Oh,
book
cool. Oh, wow.
before this. So when I was in high school, I was like in these advanced language arts classes. I was in advanced English courses. So like I skipped this and went to directly to like James Joyce, And as a result, I read the Dubliners. I never tried to read Ulysses, forget it. But I did read Portrait of the Artist as a young man. That was the type of thing that when you took your advanced level English courses, you wanted to write an essay on something like Portrait of the Artist as a young man. You weren't going to write something about the Great Gatsby. That was not acceptable, right? For the advanced placement tests.
Okay.
So I never read this book, and I have to say that my opinion is that I found it somewhat underwhelming. I feel that like Fitzgerald's. I know this is a cliche, but I feel that like his reach exceeded his grasp. He
Interesting.
was trying to reach for something that was going to be profound, and I see what he was trying to do, but I don't think he achieved it.
Okay.
I don't think this book has the profundity that he clearly wanted it to
So what do you think
have.
he was trying to achieve?
I think he was trying to write something. I think he was trying to write the great American novel,
Oh,
as that cliche. I think he was trying to uh, conjure a character that would embody, you know, uh, the character of the American, right?
uh,
The striving, the
yeah.
obsession with materialism,
Mm,
the desire to be more than you were born as, and the almost impossibility of achieving that, the almost the faith almost that achievement and money could somehow change you into a different thing. Like I said, at a cellular level, I think that's what he was going for, and I get that. I get those themes. I just don't. I don't feel that. I don't feel he achieved it. I don't think he achieved it. I think when people read this, they remember the green light, and
yeah.
it was nothing. And when I read it, I'm like, okay, let me think about. I know about the green light, and I realize it's just money because it doesn't mean anything more than that.
Yeah.
He sees
Yeah.
her as a way to she represents money to him. She
Mm,
represents glamour and status,
yeah.
right? And that's what he wanted to
That's what he wants.
grasp.
He wants
And
that
he
more than
could
her.
never,
Mm,
yeah, he saw her as that, and he could never reach it. He could never get the status that he wanted. And even when he thought it was a fait accompli, it was snatched away from him at the last moment because he's not that type of a person.
yeah.
He's the he's a Wisconsin, redneck essentially, who's an imposter, right?
Yeah.
And you can't change yourself into anything you want. You can get as rich as you want, but you can't change what you essentially are.
I'm quite glad to hear you say that because I have to say that was my impression, and I um I read I can't remember who said it, but I thought it was very good advice. They said the worst thing you can ever do to someone is say, "Read this book; it's amazing," because you expectations are here, and they're not going to meet them, and then you think the book's worse than
Right.
it is. But I read the book. I thought it was fine and a bit kind
Yeah.
of, almost like this is going too far, but almost like kind of Gossip Girl,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, I
very
see
these
it.
are rich people and their problems, and okay, great, whatever. Um, And then I read a lot of the sort of critiques of them and all the ideas about them, and I thought, oh god, maybe I've like really missed something here. Maybe there was something really profound going on that I missed because I'm so
No.
stupid. But then I wondered if, but then it started. Some of them started to remind me of, when you watch like the latest. I'm a bit harsh on this. So my brother's a big Superman fan. I think a lot of it's right, but like, there's a Superman movie comes out and it's great. There's explosions, guys flying, awesome. And then some guy comes out and tells you about how this is a profound retelling of the Christ story, and it says all this about America. And it's like at some point, you've got to read what's in the text and not like, backfill these ideas.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. That was kind of my impression of it.
Yeah, you don't want to put too much on it. I think it's well written. I think he has a great voice. Like I said, I believe his talent is for scene. I don't think his character development was that great. I didn't think the dialogue was that great. Maybe I think maybe the woodenness and how stilted the dialogue was like he probably did that on purpose because he wanted to show how shallow and self-regarding these people were, that they wanted to project a certain image of themselves as cool and detached, and they sort of had like they were sort of morally, we've talked about this before, sort of like above normal moral
Yeah.
considerations, right? They were sort of amoral in a sort of a trendy way, where they weren't shocked by anything. They're carrying on these affairs and they're drinking all the time, and they're sort of just, and that they're very sophisticated because they're not like regular people who think that people should behave in a decent way.
Mm.
So, um,
How did you find?
but
I want to ask you about the. How did you find the eyes? They talk about the ash heap bit where he travels through to go to New York City, and there's the big billboard of the doctor and his
oh
eyes.
yeah, 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 yeah,
And that
yeah,
was one
his
of the things where
eyes.
I felt like I feel like you're trying to say something profound here, but I'm not getting it. I don't know what's going on.
I don't know. He feels he's being watched. I'm not really sure. Maybe there's some sort of a judgment. Like he's like,
Well,
in other words, he's sort of like, you're going where now? It's
right.
not like I see like the city is where all the sin takes place. It's where the people go to escape their spouses and carry on. And so I do think that there's that idea that the city is a place of sin. World War One. There was a great saying from America at that point about young men who came back from Europe after the war, and it was a song, I believe. They said, "How are you going to keep them down on the farm now that they've seen Paris?" So they've been, in a way, they've been infected by European.
You're a
They've
French
seen
girl.
the
No,
yeah, they've seen the
yeah.
cafes, they've seen the prostitutes,
Oh, yeah.
they've drank fine liquor, the champagne, and
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
and so they've been corrupted in a sense. There's always this sense that there's the goodness of the farm, there's the goodness of the country, simple,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? There's not this sophisticated moral corruption that takes place in the city.
Mm.
And I think that's where I do get that's where Nick is going. He wants to go back to that simplicity because he's disgusted by, I think, almost the impersonal nature of what he's witnessed. The fact that this man, that Gatsby, that he's actually grown fond of, and he understands that the man's driven by, he thinks he's driven by love for Daisy. I think we as the reader are meant to understand that Daisy represents something to him that he's trying to capture, and Daisy herself is just
Daisy is in
what
fact
she,
awful.
yes, and what she wants and is really immaterial to him,
Mm.
right? But he's sort of disgusted with how when Gatsby's murdered, no one shows up,
Yeah.
and they're happy to take from him, but they won't even give him the final dignity of going to his funeral. And he's like, I want to go back out to that darkness beyond the city where everything makes more sense, where there's some sort of an order,
It's
and
interesting at
maybe
the
that's what
end. It kind of jumped out to me as a bit strange, but at the end, Nick says, "Oh, sorry, I've just googled it. They're a rotten crowd. You're worth the whole damn bunch put together."
Mm.
What do you mean? What? I mean, he was fine, Gatsby, but I didn't get the impression that he was. He's quite endearing, right? The way he's very shy about
Yeah.
Davy, and all that kind of stuff.
I think he means what I think he means is that Gatsby is an idealist. I
Right.
believe that
Yes.
that's what it is.
And he
Gatsby is an
believes.
idealist. They're
Yes, I
they're
think right.
jaded. They're absolutely jaded.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Gatsby is doing this for an ideal, right? Now, what I think what you're meant to think that this is a tragedy because his idealism blinds him to the reality of what's happening,
Mm,
right? He's trying to achieve this ideal. He puts Daisy, this idea of Daisy, and all she represents to him. He wants to fulfill this ascension. I finally become good enough,
yeah.
to get this girl and all she represents. And the reality turns out to be he failed at the last moment because he didn't understand what was real. He didn't understand what he was up against. He didn't understand how
Right.
these things really work
That's
because
right.
he's not from that world.
Yeah.
So that's why he says you're worth the whole damn bunch of them. You really believed. You did this for something,
Yes.
and maybe you were naive, and
Yeah.
maybe you did you undertook you did underhanded things to get there, but your heart was in the right place.
Everyone would
Something
like
like that.
to
Yeah.
be a better place, and I think
Yeah.
that's proven at the end, right? Because Gatsby's willing to take the fall for the crash
Yeah.
for
That's
Daisy,
right.
even after having been rejected. Whereas Tom and Daisy, like a flash, they're gone, pinned it on Gatsby to
Yep.
really ruin some other people's lives and get drunk all day and do nothing, no work.
Don't they go to like Europe? I think they
Although, yeah,
escape to Europe on a trip.
of course.
Yeah, yeah. Right. So where do they go? They go to
Yeah,
Europe, right?
yeah, yeah.
I think that's also symbolic. Where do they escape to? They go back. They go to Europe.
Um, I think. Do you remember we talked about Christmas Carol and we talked about It's a Wonderful Life? I think there's very interesting ways that literature can come to your attention. And I read that when Gatsby, the Great Gatsby, started getting the acclaim that it now has, was that it was given to GIs in World War II as like a free book, basically to pass the time to read. So people will have been jumping
Really?
into Normandy as paratroopers or landing on the beaches with the Great Gatsby in there, and it was because it was small, could fit in there, and it crucially run out of copyright. So 150, like 300,000 GIs or whatever, will have been in on my island reading the Great
Yeah.
Gatsby,
Reading this book. Yeah.
and then we'll have taken all those, all those themes and whatnot back home and shaped the nation.
Yeah. And certainly that is the case. Yeah. Like I said, I think there's a lot. This book reached for a lot. I'm not sure it captured all of it. But overall, I think it does. I mean, it attempts to say something profound about the American character, right? And our neurosis, about Europe and about status and class. I think that's what it really is.
Yes.
Americans are neurotic when it comes to this type of stuff. We
Yeah.
crave status and class, and we live in a country where we know we're kind of supposed to feel guilty about it because we know what we're told our culture is all about. It's about flatness, you know what I mean? It's about everyone's starting at the same level and some, and rising. Some rise high by talent, but that's a myth, right?
Yeah.
It's a myth we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel like we're um, it's the old Roman trope of the simple and honest farmer, who hasn't been corrupted by the manners of the Greeks, and that's why how we see Europe. But we also secretly lust after European class, and we always do. And if we have enough money, that's where we go. That's
Yep, that makes sense. And
yeah.
so, final thought. I'll run a crazy theory past you that I read that maybe circles us back to the opening where I said Brits obsessed with class, Americans obsessed with race. I read a theory that Gatsby's black or
Really?
passing, if you know what I mean. So of some kind of mixed heritage. The basis for this is that all of the same themes of him striving to attain but not being able to get there hold. There's a couple of references apparently about him having he thick curly hair, so he cuts his hair every day or every second day. Which, if you were trying to hide some kind of African American ancestry, you might do. it also, the same thing I read also suggested that, do you remember when Tom's talking about all his books that he's reading about the white man and the threat and whatnot, and he talks
Mm,
about himself having like a pure white heritage or something, and
yeah.
Daisy says, "Oh, me, yeah, like me too." And there's like a pregnant pause, and then Tom's like, "Yeah, okay." And the idea there being like, "Well, you're Kentucky slaveholders. There's
Oh,
probably something in your history." And then they also suggested Jordan as well was because there's in that same conversation, Jordan says, "Well, we're all white here," like in a weirdly defensive.
yeah.
um,
I mean, it's quite possible this idea that he was they would the word they would have used is miscegenated, I
right,
guess.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
And you know what? I it's an interesting idea. I didn't
yeah.
pick up on that, but it's quite
I
possible.
have to, yeah, I
Yeah.
have to say, like at first, I thought this is classic, like 2025. Let's make it. The current thing, you know. But the more I read it, the more I was like, yeah, I mean, it would
Yeah, they're
definitely,
quite pointed about it. Yeah.
and it would fit in the whole theme of Fitzgerald's kind of. It's not all like you were saying, hollow. It's not what we purport it
Hmm.
to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that adds a new dimension to it.
Yeah.
That wow, that's
Yeah.
yeah. It could very well be that too. I mean, because I think that in America we often have you see people go like, well, not only is he not the right class, but also, hey, we said in the past, at least I'm white and you're not, and that just makes me inherently superior or something
Yeah.
like that. But it's possible. It does add a new dimension to it. I
Mm.
mean, I think it works without it, but
Yeah.
it's quite possible that's part of it. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so the next time we have to decide, I think, on a British novel that tells us something about the British the British character, the British soul,
There's,
if you will.
yeah.
So,
It's a harder thing
so
to
you
encapsulate. Yeah.
got to think about that.
I've had a thought
Eh,
of Brideshead Revisited.
okay, Evelyn Waugh.
Evelyn Waugh. Have you read it?
I haven't, no,
Real treat
but
for you then.
all right. And then I think, what I'd like to do is to keep on this the next time. There's a book I think that has also been called one of the great Americans. I believe you're familiar with the author Cormac McCarthy,
Oh
are you
yeah,
not?
of course.
Okay. Cormac McCarthy wrote The Road, which I think is really one of the finest books that's been written in the last 25 years. But there's another book that was written in 1985 called Blood Meridian.
Oh, I
It's
definitely that.
called Blood Meridian or the Evening Redness in the West. It's a western. It's really a western, but it's set on the U.S. Mexico border, and it has to do with scalp hunting. But it's really a lot more than that. So that's another one that I think. Now, like I said, I've read that book probably 5 times, and I hadn't read this. So this one has the reputation of being, a candidate for the great American novel. But as a novel, Blood Meridian is much better.
Okay, all right. I look
So,
forward to it.
okay, so you want to do Brideshead?
Brideshead Revisited. It says it's only 326 pages. Can you manage?
Yep,
Perfect.
can manage it. All right, man. Nice to talk to you. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and thanks for anyone, all of our many
Many,
listeners
many
and
listeners.
subscribers who listen to us and our little book club here uh, called the what do we call
Light
this? I
Brigade.
can the Light Brigade. I can never remember it off the top of the Light
You came up
Brigade
with it. It's
podcast.
just such a great name.
I came up with it. Cannon to the left of us, cannon to the right of us, etc. All right. Have a good week. See you next month.